Hey there, everyone. It's Christy, and you'll notice that it's not me. You're seeing my avatar. And first, I'd like to welcome you to this evening where we're chatting about the Iowa caucuses, and we're going to be discussing the results as they come in and our reactions to the results and what it means going forward. So, just as an explanation, I'm not feeling all that great. I'm hopped up on cold medicines and have spent most of the day in bed, but since I am going to be awake anyway, it doesn't really matter. I'm going to tough this out and go hopefully right through to the results of the Iowa caucuses tonight. But I don't have to do it by myself. I am joined by the ever fun and informative Will Fox and his channel, which we'll be talking about. So hello, Will.
Hi, good morning to you and I, because it's 2 in the morning here, and good evening to everyone in the United States who's watching. It's really exciting.
Yes, for political junkies, it's the adrenaline of the night that keeps us going, and when we live on different parts of the world, to waiting for the results to come. So, yeah, Will, would you like to first tell people who are going to be watching this about your channel name, and what is on your channel?
Okay, so hi everyone, my name is Will. I operate a very small but comfy little channel called Political Junkie News here on YouTube. And what I do is every single week I post what I hope to be an informative video where I dig deep into a political or historical topic. So a couple weeks ago, I did something about the Civil War, about something called the Trent Affair. And then just this week, I did a really in-depth video, a collaboration with another YouTuber named Tristan, who operates Step Back History here on YouTube, about the Iowa caucuses. So it's always politics, it's always history, and it's always my best attempt to get you better informed, more informed than maybe the other people you might know in your life. Yeah.
The benefit you offer.
Yes.
That's
That's my best 2 a.m. pitch.
I like it. I like it. And we're going to be discussing the structures of the caucuses and how the delegates are going to be allotted and what this means going forward. And then we might also be, in an hour's time, crashed by an outsider. We've got two Yanks here analyzing the race from our sort of native perspective, people who've grown up and are used to the system. We might be visited for a little while by Kevin Logan, who is a bit of an upstart, but also a very funny commentator on politics. And he's going to, if he does join us in about an hour's time, he'll be giving us his non-American, European perspective on the circus that is our American
I'm sure he'll
presidential
have
system.
nothing but good things to say about the American system of
Yes.
electing a president.
We've really improved upon the parliamentary system, that Britain developed over centuries with our system, but as clearly evidenced by the fact that our presidential races last for about 2 years, and the terms are only 4 years in length. Very efficient,
God,
our system.
I know we're going to get to this later, but if Iowa's always been first since 1972, and you think if any state ever had the audacity to move their primary up or their caucus up before Iowa, this thing could go longer than 2 years. The earlier it starts, that means the earlier candidates have to announce, the earlier people have to start pumping up their supporters and things. I can't even imagine. People will be announcing their candidacies on Inauguration Day.
Basically, if we're going to get to that point. Inauguration Day is also going to be when people start opening their Iowa offices for the next presidential race.
No kidding, no kidding. They won't need to shut down and put in like a Staples in between. They can just keep it, all year round, 365, a campaign office.
Yeah, so for those of you who might not have always gone to the local campaign office, they're usually set up, in my experience, in a rather dilapidated, struggling strip mall.
Yep.
Somewhere in town, a place that was often used to be like a nail bar.
God, yes.
Some kind of, formerly rather, like marginal retail store that would, could move around quite easily. And the campaign comes and doesn't really ever fit in properly because it's cheap tables, cheap chairs, boxes of lit, and maps pinned to every wall. And then
just
they leave.
Signs and everything. Like your workspace is like a foldable table covered in signs, and you're like, what am I doing?
Now, for those of you who feel a little bit brave, Apparently there is a box on the, or a banner on the YouTube channel page that you're watching that says like join the Hangout, where if you click on that, it will take you to this Hangouts event page. And at that event page, if you go to the upper right-hand corner to what looks like a Rubik's Cube grid, you can click on there and ask us a question. And
Do it.
And we're going to be taking questions if people have them, probably in about a little bit over an hour's time to give people time to get into the event thing and ask some questions. But to get us started, for those of you who don't know, or for those of you who need to be reminded, it is probably useful to explain the quirky nature of the Iowa caucus system, because it's not like regular voting. And fortunately for us, Will has spent a great deal of time and effort educating himself on the intricacies of the process so that we don't have to. So Will, please take it away.
Okay. Hey, everybody. So right now, I'm just checking the weather, and it's 46 degrees in Iowa, and it's not going to get down to freezing. They were saying it's going to be storming in Iowa. The reason I say that is because the Iowa caucuses are one of those events that takes time, that goes for a couple of hours even. So right now, if you're watching the news, if you've got it maybe simultaneously up with Christy and I, what you're seeing is just people going out in droves in Iowa. And what they're doing is they're not going into a ballot box. They're not going in to just like check a box and leave and go home. They're signing up for basically what amounts to a very, very large town hall. And on the Democrat and the Republican side, both of these groups are going to separate themselves by party. Then they're going to separate themselves again by their preferred candidate of the party that they're affiliated with. So if they're Republican, they're going to be setting themselves with other Trump supporters or other Rubio supporters, so on and so forth, other Clinton supporters if they're a Democrat in a separate room, or other Sanders supporters. And once they've separated themselves out, each candidate will be assigned delegates. There's a little bit in between that, which we might go into later. But basically, here's how it boils down, is that the delegates chosen tonight make up a very, very, very small percentage of the actual delegates necessary to win the nomination. And in fact, none of the delegates selected tonight are actually going to the national convention for either the Democrat or the Republican Party. The delegates chosen tonight from the caucuses actually go to a county convention, then to a state convention, and then eventually get filtered into the national convention. So all the fuss tonight is over a bunch of delegates that don't even necessarily go to the national convention. But what is unique about the Iowa caucus is that it's a town hall event, people getting together. You don't just go in and check a box like a primary. And this is something that's been going on in Iowa since about 1972. Did I miss anything? Let's see. What do you think, Christy? How did you like my explanation?
Sorry, I had put myself on mute because since you started talking, I managed to cough and almost sneeze. So
awesome. Yeah. So the original reason that the caucuses were first in Iowa was actually just a general fluke of the rules. In 1968, Eugene McCarthy had won several states going towards the national convention on the Democratic side, but he wasn't actually the nominee. It was Hubert Humphrey was the Democratic nominee. He was chosen basically at the convention by party officials. And so people in general were so disgusted by this that in 1972, the Democratic Party changed their rules so that all members of the party, whether they were big party bosses or just normal voters, could participate. And Iowa actually had to move their caucuses forward because each one of their four-step delegate selection process, so from the local caucuses to the county, the state to the national, 30 days has to transpire according to their own rules between each of those events. And so they pushed it way forward to January. And it was a pretty uneventful 1972, which meant that the first primary in the nation, New Hampshire, wasn't that bothered that Iowa had passed them and gone forward in time to have their caucus first. But it became much more significant in 1976 when Jimmy Carter basically stole the show in Iowa. He came in second, but he defied expectations. And from then on, the Iowa caucus was always relevant. It was always important for both political parties.
Thank you for that wrap up. Now, one of the things
Yeah.
that I found interesting, because I think I mean I follow the races before, but I think in this year, because of the extreme nature of the Republican field being so wide, that and also the effect of having proportional delegates is so different. One of the things that struck me was the way that for the Democrats, you have to caucus and until you get to about 15% of support within the room, if I remember this correctly, depending on how many delegates you're getting to elect. Whereas with the Republicans, they each give their speech, but then they cast ballots, almost like a secret ballot. There isn't that sort of winnowing, sifting and winnowing of delegates. And I thought that that's just an example of how a political structure can impact a political outcome. Because if you thought about it, if the Democratic format of this reaching a minimum threshold of 15% support was happening in the Republicans, and so every time, let's say, Jeb Bush got 7% that couldn't meet the cutoff, his supporters would either have to go to, like what the Democrats do, this sort of unaffiliated or undesignated group, or to another candidate and shuffle around. Someone like a Ben Carson, those supporters might have ended up going for Ted Cruz. But now when they get into their caucuses, since they're not having to do a first or second order preference, they can go and vote their first choice, which might end up bringing down Cruz's potential number of delegates if the structure of the caucuses were different.
And to go to another angle like that, what you bring up a great point. Also, the fact that it's a secret ballot means that people won't feel that embarrassment necessarily if they do decide to go ahead and vote with their gut and vote for Donald Trump. I was watching an interview this morning where a reporter was in a milkshake, like an old soda pop shop in a small town, and he was talking with some women around a table, and one of the women expressed her desire to vote for Donald Trump, and of course she was immediately kind of not hissed at, but kind of nudged by her friends and looked at a little bit funny. And if the Republican caucus worked the same way as the Democratic caucus, her friends might peer pressure her right into moving to another side of the room and voting for another candidate. Because on the Democratic side, you really do. It's all in the open. But on the Republican side, she likes Donald Trump. She can write his name, put that slip in the bucket, and it's done. None of her friends have to know. And I think that's an important dynamic as well.
And that's a dynamic that we've seen even in having some impact on the polling results that survey companies are getting, depending upon whether or not they're using an in-person live interviewer or doing an online survey for candidate support. Because what a recent polling company found was that when they found a discrepancy in people who had college educations in terms of how many of them supported Trump online versus how many reported it in a live survey. And for people with college educations, they were less likely to report it. So it might be a mode effect. And similar, like you were saying, with the open caucusing format versus the closed ballot, those kind of Trump people don't have to worry about the social desirability bias, which should drive up his total delegates by the end of the night.
I'm curious as well with the open Democratic side, how not to be pessimistic here, but how aggressive and hostile it might get in some of these places where you have lots and lots of passionate, maybe first time 17, 18-year-old caucus goers that are really pushing for Bernie Sanders, who maybe don't accept the other people in the room, or don't accept the point of view of Clinton goers, or vice versa, older folks who really think that the young people, the new people are pushing the party too far left. And I wonder if that will cause any conflict that we might hear about as the night progresses.
I think it might depend on whether or not Martin O'Malley actually has anybody turn out for him, because with the Democratic moving around the room thing and that 15% cutoff, if there are only 4 people in the room who are there to support Martin O'Malley, well, then there's not a whole lot of. I mean, you can have your speeches, or the undeclared delegates on the Democratic side, if they don't reach a 15% threshold either, to have to pick. But you might be if people are going there with their preferences I mean, it depends maybe on how many last minute voters are out there. And I have a feeling that there are more people who are undecided who are open to the Republican side. And again, this is anecdotal, but there was a news reporter on MSNBC reporting on Harbaugh that she had a woman who said she was torn between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And again, yes, I know. And this is how I felt as this political researcher when I heard someone say, "Oh, I'm choosing either between the UK Independence Party or the Green Party," and you just go,
Yeah.
"Could you say that again?" I don't think did I hear you correctly. Let me just check that. But her reasoning was that she thought that Hillary Clinton, on paper, was far and away the most qualified person based on her work experience that across any of the candidates. But she really also liked Trump's approach and his solutions of breaking through the gridlock of Washington. And she was literally going to be deciding on the night whether she was going to go register as a Democrat or a Republican.
So you're being way too nice to that lady. You're being way too nice. She's obviously undecided, and it just goes to show how crazy some of the oh man, that's how can you be so flippy floppy undecided?
But there are also people who are for Bernie and for Trump as well on the whole idea of independence of political campaigning.
Yeah, I've heard that as well, and that to me seems at least slightly more ideological consistent. It's still ridiculous, but if you think about the fact that both Donald Trump and both Bernie Sanders have been talking about money in politics, they're both anti-establishment, they're both leading some form of a revolution in one way or another. You can kind of see the parallels. It's a much harder thing to draw, perhaps, between Hillary and Trump, besides the fact that they're just both rich.
Now that I see we've got about 10 viewers in the room. Hi, everyone.
Hey, guys.
Just to update everyone, so the skinny is, I have a terrible cold, and there is no way I'm sitting on camera and showing you what I look like sat here with my hair up in like a hair banana thing in my pajamas. Can talk at least, so that's what I'm doing. And we are going to be chatting about the Iowa caucuses, its structure. We're going to have some information on the polling pretty soon. But if you guys want to participate, if I'm doing this correctly, we're going to do a screen share here. Screen share, entire screen share. Now, and when you come into the Hangout, you should see this be part of the conversation. And if you click on that, it will take you to a YouTube channel, or no, a Google Plus page that says events on it. And when you do that in this here in the upper right-hand corner, when you hover over it, you should see a grid, and you'll be able to press on that for Q&A, and you'll be able to do a question to us. So if you want to click on that, be part of the conversation, open up that window and watch the video in that instead, and then you can write us questions, and we can answer them. So I would encourage you to try that out. I have not done this before. I am pushing the edges of my technological experience, and we're going to see if it works out. And we don't have to answer every single question. So if there are any trolls in the room who want to be dicks, I'm not going to answer your questions. But if there are sincere questions or funny questions, then we'll go ahead and answer them a little bit farther down the line. The other thing that I can tell you is on the Be Part of the Experience button is there's an element called showcasing. And in the showcase on that page, you will see that I've already created links for you guys, just like a good lecturer would for her students, to the Real Clear Politics polling data for Iowa on the Republican and Democratic side, New Hampshire on the Democratic and Republican side, South Carolina, and the national numbers. That's how much I care about you guys. I was up setting up those links for you so you could click and see the polling numbers yourself before I even went live on this show. So that was what I wanted to tell viewers. Now we can get back into the nitty gritty of the Iowa races tonight while we're waiting for these results to come in. Speaking of,
I was just going to say, what's amazing about this whole thing is that, okay, you've had candidates in Iowa now for months, for a year in some cases. You have, like, Ted Cruz basically got sworn into the Senate and then flew to Des Moines, Iowa, right? So this has been in the works forever. You've got reporters, you've got television ads, you've got local news crews, polling. This state is drowning, and the total number of delegates that will be assigned tonight will be about 70. There's about 3,000 necessary to win on the Democratic side and about 2,000 necessary to win on the Republican side. And all this fuss is over 70. And it just goes to show the kind of momentum that's possible in Iowa and the kind of narrative that gets built after the Iowa caucuses go, the kind of, or maybe more importantly, the kind of funds that are raised for campaigns afterwards. And it's just, it's a lot of fanfare for such a small number of actual heads at the national convention.
I think that's an excellent point to bring up. And importantly, it adds another dimension to the results tonight. So, let's say because I often don't talk about the Democratic race. So let's say I'll do a hypothetical with the Democrats. Bernie Sanders, squeaks out a win. Well, if he squeaks out a win and Clinton is only one delegate off in the race, yes, he has sort of the number one place, but he hasn't distanced himself in terms of his delegate count yet. And even if Donald Trump tonight wins, as you point out, it's not going to benefit him in much in the way of delegates because this is not a winner-take-all situation. These delegates are going to be smeared out based on the proportion of total delegates that they earn. The winner-take-all elements for the Republicans at least doesn't come until after the 15th of March. So it's not just about who coming in sort of first, second, and third, especially in the Republican side. It's about how many delegates that you can pick up on your way to give you that sort of the hits on the what I call the 4Ms: money, machinery, momentum, and message.
Mm-hmm. And to add to that, in the 2012 cycle, just to punch our point home here, the winner of the most delegates in Iowa was Congressman Ron Paul from Texas. In fact, he won the vast majority. I think it was 21 of 25 Republican delegates up for grabs that year, uncommitted delegates, unbound delegates, and they're called. But he wasn't the winner of the popular vote in Iowa. That was Mitt Romney and Rick Santorum, who tied at about 25%. And so it just goes to show that by the time anyone even knew that Ron Paul had won the most delegates, Mitt Romney had already far surpassed the delegate count necessary in other places because the momentum and the messaging, as you put it, and the money had already moved well on from Iowa.
We work so well together. We're like a tennis match where we just throw the ball back and forth, because that sets up one of the questions that I wanted to get to, which I'll summarize by singing a rather blue song that, as a Badger, I didn't go to Madison, but I had a lot of friends who went to Madison and got to know a song about Iowa. But the question that I want to ask in terms of does Iowa matter? For all this attention and all of this effort and money that's poured into it in terms of the state, it just begs the question, as anyone who's been to a Wisconsin Badgers football match playing against Iowa would know, who gives a fuck about the whole state of Iowa, the whole state of Iowa, the whole state of Iowa, who gives a fuck about the whole state of Iowa? I don't like corn.
Oh, dang, those are fighting words.
But does Iowa really matter? And I think the answer is yes and no, and I think you'll agree with that. But do you want to answer first?
Iowa does matter. Iowa should matter sometimes, but Iowa matters way more than it should most of the time. So that was really complicated. Iowa matters because it's the first caucus state. It matters because it's been the first caucus state since 1972. It matters because maybe 50-50, it actually predicts the nominee. And it matters because the person who's been the nominee of either major party has never gotten less than third in the Iowa caucus since 1972. That being said, it shouldn't matter because it's well over 90% white. It's a tiny, well, not super tiny, but not very big geographical state. And it's been first every single cycle. And in my personal opinion, it's great that Iowa gets the spotlight, but another state should get the spotlight at some point. We should be switching it up every now and again. We should have a new way of running our primaries. So the answer is yes, it does. Yes, it should sometimes, but it shouldn't always be so consequential.
Of reasons that are in favor of places like Iowa and New Hampshire having a say in the presidential race, because as soon as it goes to the general, they don't. California, Florida, Texas, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, the kind of typical states that end up playing a role. A lot of states don't get to play that role.
Mm-hmm.
So having two smaller states so early on does allow at least those residents the kind of attention to their issues that they otherwise would not get. But your point is also one to be taken on, is that they're not highly representative of the United States. They don't tend to do a very good job, especially not on the Republican side, of actually getting the matching up to who the nominee was of the race. And maybe it should move around a little bit. Why not a Nevada? Why not a Illinois? Why not a Washington state? So, I mean, those are larger structural questions, and there are reasons why it won't be a floating caucus. There's a lot of vested interest in keeping it the way it is. But yeah, in some ways, it would be, to me, quite fascinating if Trump does manage to win tonight. Because if he comes out of Ohio where he shouldn't be winning, and then he goes on to win New Hampshire where he's predicted to win, then it's very difficult to see how he is stopped, other than a radical realignment of the candidates he faces due to a high number of people getting out and backing an alternative. But we can talk about game that out a little bit later on.
I was just going to add to the Iowa thing there, to what we were talking about as far as Iowa, should it be going first and should it have this much influence? I am sympathetic to the argument that a small state or a rural state should start off the presidential primary process, because of the fact that it gives candidates an opportunity, maybe underdog candidates like a Jesse Jackson, like a Jimmy Carter, like a Pat Buchanan, like a Bernie Sanders, to go out there and do retail, old school style, shaking hands politics. But that doesn't mean it, like you said, it doesn't mean it has to be Iowa every single time.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just bopping off my mute button every time I'm not talking because I don't want to cough over Will. So if there's a slight delay in my reaction, it's because I go, oh, he stopped talking. Okay, turn my mic back on. Right. So now, yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
You go. You had another point. I was going to switch topics.
I've actually, well, but if you look at Iowa and you look at New Hampshire, I mean, they're both well over 90% white. New Hampshire is like the 46th smallest state in the union, and both of these states actually have more weight in the presidential election in some ways than California or Texas. What I mean by that is that per elector in the Electoral College, there's about 3,000 New Hampshiremen to one electoral vote. Whereas, for example, my home state of Texas, it's closer to 800,000 people per elector. So these states do get some extra weight in multiple ways. First, in the terms of the presidential primary, and then second, when the general election comes, maybe the candidates aren't going there, but they do at least get a boost in the Electoral College because of the way that our system's set up. In fact, I think I actually know this little piece of trivia. The last person to actually campaign in all 50 states was Richard Nixon when he was running against JFK in 1960. Otherwise, you're right. These states are visited in their primaries and never seen again.
Very much so, unless it ends up being close. Wisconsin really won't play unless its a role as a purple state is in a really, really tight race. So, yeah, it's a very complicated part of the American electoral system.
I learned something just now. I've learned something over the last 5 minutes, and that is I did not realize that candidates were allowed to actually go into caucuses. Donald Trump is literally right now inside of a caucus, and I didn't know that either. Ted Cruz was there. Ted Cruz was at one earlier as well. They were covering it live. I didn't know that was it's so raw in Iowa. How like people can go and like argue with each other and tell their friends how to vote, peer pressure, and then the candidate themselves can be there. You can't even imagine how that would work in a general election when the candidate opens up your voting booth curtain and like, hey, tick the other box. Like how it's crazy.
So do you want to tell, just for the new viewers, tell people what you're doing, what you've got access to on your computer in terms of keeping us up to date with the results as they come in?
Well, first and foremost, I have the weather, because the Iowa caucuses come down. I guess that factor has moved on from now, but a big factor is, will people actually show up to the Iowa caucuses? Will people actually come and vote? It's not as simple as showing up and casting a ballot. You have to sit there, participate, listen to speeches, especially on the Democratic side. And turnout will play a big role tonight in whether someone like Donald Trump and his new coalition of revolutionaries wins the Republican side, or Bernie Sanders and his new coalition of revolutionaries wins on the Democratic side. So I have the weather open. That's number one. And then number two, I would be remiss without Real Clear Politics, as Christy mentioned earlier. I check Real Clear Politics every day for my polls on the right side, and they have a decent spread of columnists, but that'll be more important as the night goes on. I should open, I don't have it yet, but I know that the Iowa Republican Party and Iowa Democratic Party have live updates on their website with up-to-date, real-time results as they come in, but I'll have to find that when I have a down moment.
Yeah, when is that going to be? I guess I'll have to go on some sort of rant about something or other, or maybe take people through some polling stuff here for a little bit, give you a little bit of downtime, because you've been a trooper talking a lot so far this evening. So while we're waiting, it might probably be worth listeners, and there's up to 50. Hello, you awesome, amazing, nerdy political types. Should we give our predictions about how we think it's going to go tonight?
Oh no! Yeah, I can. It's going to be Cruz, Trump. It's going to be Trump on the Republican side, and it's going to be Clinton on the Democratic side.
Oof! And how close do you think it's going to be in Iowa between Bernie and Clinton?
I think it's going to be within 5 points for sure. I'll go as far as to say it's going to be within 2 points, favoring Clinton.
Oh, see, no, I'm not. I'm clearing my throat on air because I'm reaching over to get a glass of water while I'm talking. I would agree. I think it's going to be quite close. I'm not going to predict confidently Clinton win. I actually wouldn't be surprised kind of if it went either way. But I also think that the Democratic race is a much longer race than the GOP race this year. So I think, well, we can talk about paths to victory and how we would give political advice to the candidates. We're going to do that coming up. But yeah, I think Clinton pipping Sanders to the post is, I would expect that tonight. And then also I would put Trump, Cruz, and Rubio. So
first, first I would say that my prediction is not as solid as I might have sounded. I just wanted to sound confident because, hey, you got to put a bold prediction out there. I have no idea how it's going to go tonight. I would not be surprised at all if Cruz or Bernie Sanders pulled it off. But second of all, I can't wait to talk to you about how long the respective races are going to go, because I have the exact opposite opinion as you do.
All right. Okay. So where do you want me to start, on the Democratic side or the Republican side?
Let's start with the Democrats.
Okay. So in my opinion, I think that because of the nature of, we were talking about not the downsides, but the limitations of Iowa and New Hampshire in terms of their representation versus the American population. I think Clinton really hits her stride after South Carolina. And I think there's more, because of Sanders' weakness with the non-white population and the Clinton machine. I see, for me, for what it would take, okay, if we did this sort of like road to victory, if you were going to be a paid consultant for each one of the candidates, what would you say? It would seem to me that Bernie really needs to run the table. He needs to do Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina in order to have bashed down the Clinton machine. And so if he doesn't run that table, it's just going to drag the race out longer. And I don't know that a longer race helps him. I think it's because of the longevity of the Clintons. It also might depend, too, on how he performs with non-white voters down the line, and if he can actually start reaching into those constituencies and bringing them over. But he can't rely entirely on college-age populations to get him, victories. It has to be a wider demographic across ages and across all ethnicities and backgrounds. And I know that Clinton has that structurally. So it would be a matter of whether or not Bernie can put that together as a consequence of running the table. And I'm going to cough, so you talk.
Okay, so I think we agree on the basic things, that Sanders needs to make inroads with minority communities. He needs to run the table. He needs to win Iowa. He needs to win New Hampshire. The reason behind that is because winning Iowa and New Hampshire gives him the possibility to start moving the poll numbers in a dramatic way in the South, because as of right now, the South is Hillary Clinton's firewall. When you arrive in South Carolina, you have a Democratic Party that's very, very heavily African American. And among African Americans, at least to the best of my knowledge, as I have seen so far, Bernie Sanders has not been able to make those inroads. Rhetorically, he's saying the right things, but the poll numbers haven't moved yet. And so that for that reason, combined with the fact that Hillary Clinton already has, I don't remember exactly how many, but quite a few super delegates committed to supporting her on the Democratic side, I feel like it will be wrapped up faster, especially if Hillary Clinton does pull out Iowa tonight. That's devastating to the Sanders people. It's sad to say because Bernie Sanders, I am a supporter, and Bernie Sanders has come out of basically obscurity to tie it up here and to create a dead heat. But the momentum created by actually winning Iowa is what he needs.
I think as a Hillary supporter, if we were at the caucuses tonight and you were trying to win me over, this would be the question that I see in terms of the problem of a Sanders candidacy. If Trump, let's say Trump wins and ends up being the nominee, you've got a capitalist versus a socialist. And the American people have not voted for socialists. And there was a person in my focus groups in the UK who was talking about their attempts to change the vote system to an alternative vote system. And he said the confused mind says no. And it seems to me that if Bernie is the nominee, the GOP is going to just be on a socialism kick for the next however many months, defining him by that term, which is already a poison pill in American politics. So how do you get over the socialism label?
Okay, so the Republicans are going to come after Bernie Sanders in a way that we can't even begin to imagine. Right now, I think the national polls, the national matchups between like Rubio and Sanders, or Clinton and Rubio, or Trump and Sanders, these sort of mismatches usually put Sanders way up above. And I think part of that people don't realize is because Sanders hasn't been subject to the very attacks that Christie is talking about right now. They're going to talk about his age, the fact that he would be the oldest elected president ever at 76 on Inauguration Day. They're going to talk about his honeymoon or whatever in the Soviet Union. They're going to talk about just the word socialism to no end. They're going to talk about the fact that he's maybe not Jewish, maybe he's an atheist. He said the other day that maybe he believed that we were all connected instead of actually saying what his religion was. Now that's fine with me, but for the vast majority of Americans, that's a no-go. If you consider the fact that atheists and socialists are two of the most like non-preferred voting groups, then what Christie's laying out there is actually incredibly troubling. However, I think you got the Bernie Sanders has a couple things going for him. Number one is that voters right now are searching for authenticity, and they're searching for something. They're searching for someone who's been consistent, someone that they can trust. And I think that Bernie Sanders has an incredibly strong case to make in that regard. We're already looking at a crazy presidential election. If both Trump and Sanders win Iowa, we can already say that we're looking at a political revolution. We're looking at an earthquake. You have Bernie Sanders, who is not actually technically a member of the Democratic Party, about to win the first Democratic caucus. And you have Donald Trump, perhaps on the precipice of winning the Republican caucus in Iowa, who, once again, is someone who has been all over the place politically for decades. If we're indeed in the midst of a political revolution, I think that anything can happen. Trump's likabilities are just as low and just as devastating as the word socialist and atheist is to the general public. So I think we're going to be basically looking at a very, very, very tight, difficult, dirty, crazy, but revolutionary race for the presidency. I'm not going to sit here and argue it's going to be easy, but I would say that it would be worth it to try.
And I'll say, if Sanders is our nominee, I'll get behind him. And I'll make videos explaining why social democracies are really nice places to live, because I lived in 2 of them now. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I started off January of this year, of 2016, with 29 paid vacation days. I just took off on a 10-day vacation with my dad. I only use like 6 of my work days. But, people in Europe routinely will take off 3 weeks in August and just go with their families to another country and spend 3 weeks on holiday, paid holiday. I want that for the American people. I want that for my family. I want my family to be able to come over here and not have to worry about their income going down because they're not earning. So I mean, I will certainly get behind our nominee, and I would hope that Sanders people, because I don't get the feeling that there's so much willingness, at least on the ones that I associate with on Facebook. I don't engage with Sanders fans when they post things because I don't want to get in fights. But
Yeah.
I don't know, because they do attack Hillary on things like her Wall Street connection, which I would say again, don't hate the player, hate the game. But if they are, I would hope that they would also rally behind our nominee, because Republican alternative is just not acceptable.
I will. I definitely will be rallying, as we've talked about before. I will be voting for Hillary. I'll be supporting Hillary if she's the nominee. I will say that I have been annoyed is probably too weak. I've been pretty angry with her over the last couple of weeks as she's intensified her attacks on Sanders in regards to healthcare policy. Because as you know, that's the most important policy to me. Universal healthcare is the most common sense thing, the most common sense reform, aside from getting money out of politics, that we could go for in the United States. It costs less money out of our economy. Results are better in all the countries that have implemented universal healthcare. It's just the right thing to do morally. And so it's just a plus, 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 plus. And it really bothered me to hear coming out of someone's mouth, Hillary Clinton, who had supported universal healthcare in the 90s, to call it unrealistic, to dash the people who would call for reforms. I don't know why she decided that healthcare was the issue she wanted to do that on, but that was really frustrating the last couple of weeks. And I know it's politics, like you said, hate the player or hate the game, not the player. But man, I have to say that it was definitely one of those moments where I realized once again, even though I've realized it 100 times before, that politics is just a dirty game. It really is.
Oh yeah, it's a bloodless battle.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally, that's why we have democracies and not civil wars.
Mm-hmm. It's a zero-sum game. There's no in a zero-sum game in America. It's winner take all. Maybe not in the Iowa caucus, but in general in the elections. First past the post. You get 10% of the vote, you get nothing. You get 20% of the vote, you get nothing. You have to get a plurality. You have to get any sort of representation, and so that means we get some really, we get some candidates that we're not so pleased with 100% of the time, and you just kind of have to hope for the best. You have to hope for the reforms you can have and try to change the system. Yeah, so that got really deep and philosophical, but
I think it's good. Hopefully,
mhm.
our viewers are enjoying it. So let's
Yeah.
talk about Hillary's path to victory. Since I did Sanders, do you want to do hers?
Hillary's path to victory is pretty simple. If she dominates Super Tuesday, she's got the nomination. The end. There's nothing more to it. If she wins South Carolina and she wins Super Tuesday, all those southern states with lots of minority voters going, lots of strongholds for her in the South, her and Bill Clinton from Arkansas. If she does well in those states, it's over. She's got the nomination.
I saw an estimate. I didn't see anyone on the Democratic side doing it, but there was the person who used to be the general counsel, I believe, for the RNC, saying that based on the way that the delegates in the RNC and the Republican side are handed out, he predicted that the Republican nominee would not be chosen until May, after Mitt Romney was chosen last time. So, I mean, even though tonight there's going to be a lot of headlines about who wins on either side of the aisle, this is just the first. This is the first down of the first quarter.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, sorry, I'm seeing some live results coming in right now.
Oh, cool. Update us.
Iowa caucuses. You know what? No, it's just one precinct. Never mind. It was literally one. It was a Coralville where there's doing some live reporting, and it was Hillary was ahead of Bernie, but it was in literally one gymnasium of one school. So nothing to write home about. Nothing to broadcast to the group. Even though I just did, but whatever. Our live stream, our rules.
That's it. We're keeping you up to date with even the most irrelevant results, the ones where only 15 people showed up. If it comes across the live wire, we'll let you know.
Actually, here's one right here. Breaking news on CNN. Entrance polls. Clinton holds tight lead over Sanders. So according to the entrance polls, which means they're asking people as they're entering into the caucuses, that's when you'll know. And also we have some Republican results, 32.7% so far for Donald Trump and 32.4% for Cruz, 13.4% for Marco Rubio. The numbers for each of them are literally less than 1,000, so these are very much the very first. This could be just the result of like one or two precincts reporting. On the Democratic side, Hillary Clinton 53%, Bernie Sanders 46%. The numbers are not given. That's with 9% of precincts reporting. So that's a pretty big deal, but it depends on which of those precincts are doing the reporting. So right now we have Donald Trump with a very, very, very slight lead, and Hillary Clinton with a decent lead over Sanders with about 9% reporting. All of this is fluid, could change. The numbers are still very low at this point. So yeah, that's the update I have for you.
That's right. That's where we saw. Sorry, I'm going to have to clear my throat on air this time.
It's
Karl
okay.
Rove's meltdown over Ohio. I hate that there's Iowa and Ohio because they're both a lot of vowels in their name states, and they're 4 letters, so I sometimes worry that I've said the wrong one. But the idea that the number of precincts reporting is for people who do exit polling. These are entrance polls, so people could change their minds in terms of how they actually end up voting in the end. But there's a certain point when you get to, depending on how homogeneous or heterogeneous the population is, if you've got 46% of the ones reporting and only rural ones are in, and there's only a few votes in those rural counties, and then one person is ahead by 15,000 votes, and there's just no mathematical way that the other person could catch them, even if they got 100% of all the votes in the remaining precincts to be reported, that you can call a race even when all the votes or the delegates counts haven't been totaled. So early on, what will be influential in these 9% reporting is where they are located in the state. And I think there are some establishment counties. Polk County is supposed to be a big establishment one, so looking there to see that as a bellwether for the establishment lane. And also, does Trump perform in the blue-collar counties of Iowa as well as he's predicted to?
Yep. That Clinton lead over Sanders was literally with 100 votes counted. A little bit more than 100 votes now, so don't take any of that into account. There is a few more accounts in on the Republican side, but it's all less than 1,000 per candidate, and really it's just a slight lead for Donald Trump. But it looks like if you're going off of 2% counted on the Republican side, that it's going to be a Trump Cruz dead heat, just like we all anticipated. So it's getting real now, y'all. Getting real. Sorry, Christy. I was looking at my computer screen, very unprofessional of me. What was your last point? I'd love to respond. I just didn't hear it.
Oh, I don't know if I remember that far back because I was thinking about the other content that you were describing. I think we were just talking about, oh yeah, I think there's 100 votes or so in. So what we're looking at are probably very rural counties, outlying areas of small populations. And so that will be representative of those precincts, but not necessarily other counties that have different demographical makeup. So these highly representative, not of the entire state, but of the local areas where those votes are coming from.
I would say that also one thing I didn't get to mention earlier is that the Sanders campaign was very, very, very much downplaying Iowa today. And I think that says a lot about their confidence in their game. What the Sanders spokeswoman said today on the news was, if we have a high turnout, then we will be successful, quote, successful. Now, she didn't say if there's a high turnout, we will win, or if there's a high turnout, we will have a high chance of winning. She said, if there's a high turnout, we will be successful, which could mean literally anything. Successful could be third place if you're Marco Rubio on the Republican side. So that's not very specific, and that to me says that they're not expecting a win. So if Sanders does in fact have an incredibly high turnout tonight and wins, that will be defying even internal polling, it sounds like, from the campaign. And one of the dynamics playing into that really quickly is the fact that in 2008, when Barack Obama brought out lots of young people, it was on January 2nd when the college kids were still at home in their own rural towns in Iowa. And this time around, all those college kids are actually on campus in those university cities, which means that those votes, might not help Bernie Sanders as much if they're not centered in the places where it truly matters in the east of Iowa, where Hillary Clinton's making a big move to win. So those are a couple extra dynamics that I didn't get to mention earlier.
Yeah, sorry. One thing that I think is worth bringing up is, when I was at college, I was a student activist and I did student advocacy, and I was always trying to get up the student turnout numbers. But it is a fact of political life that people under the age of 25 just turn out at a lower rate than people in other demographics. Aging is a material cause of that is linked to likelihood to vote. So I think it's always quite dangerous when a candidate is relying on the younger population as their core base because of their historical unreliability in turning out, or at least their lower rate of turning out compared to the older age cohorts.
Mm-hmm. No, you're definitely right. The good news, what I've been hearing, at least if you're a Sanders supporter out there, is that the Sanders supporters are incredibly well connected. And in fact, there was an app for Bernie Sanders. Now, if you're like me, your first instinct to an app is to think, "Oh my gosh, everything has an app. I don't need another app." But I'm led to believe that basically Sanders supporters in California were using the app to connect with Sanders supporters in Iowa through text messages, through calls, through emails, through Facebook, etc., to get them out to vote. And so I think that there might be an underlying organization and passion this time, just like maybe in 2008, if I'm allowed to draw that comparison, that could spur those young people to go out there and vote. You're right, though. Young people generally vote less, especially in midterms. But in exciting primary season, you never know.
Very true. Very true. So because we've been talking a lot about the Dems, maybe we can talk a bit about the Republican side, because obviously there's a lot more going on and a lot of more dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
It's three-dimensional chess, I think I've called it in one of my videos. And it appears that, Donald Trump is in a really good position to actually win Iowa. And the importance of that is that based on the demographics, he shouldn't. It should be Ted Cruz land. So this is also about a game of expectations. And Trump as well tamped down expectations by saying he wants to win Iowa. It might not turn out, but that's not what he wants to do. But if Trump wins Iowa, is he unstoppable?
No, he's not. And the main reason is because his support so far in the primary season has had a ceiling, and he is not the preferred second choice for most voters. I don't know if you agree with that analysis, but I feel like even if Donald Trump takes both Iowa and New Hampshire, there's still a decent chance that either Republicans at some point eventually do wake up and think, holy crap, what are we doing to ourselves? We're committing suicide as a party. Or that Donald Trump simply can't get over his ceiling of 40%, 45% at the very, very most. And somebody else is able to coalesce a coalition. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. You're totally right. Donald Trump is in a great position. But is he unstoppable? No, there's still a chance for somebody else to come through and win.
I think it was interesting that recently the Republicans, I think Chris Hayes, I gave you a clip in our Facebook message before the show to show you this bit, because I thought it was a fascinating conversation. Chris Hayes had who ran the campaign? Steve Schmidt, and somebody else on his show. He was talking about the Republicans going through the stages of grief very quickly, now accepting that Trump is going to be the nominee and starting to blame each other and the establishment side for it. And the finger pointing being aimed at Mike Murphy's Right to Rise, which is Jeb Bush's super PAC. People are now, there are some complaints that it really was up to Right to Rise to take on Donald Trump much earlier. And instead, what the critique has been, at least, well, here's my interpretation of it. He's been running basically the same strategy that the Bush campaign has been, which is to be second place, to be the Trump alternative, rather than running to win. And it seems to me if they weren't coordinating, Right to Rise would want their candidate to win in Iowa and win in New Hampshire and not just play for second and play it safe. I know he's kind of gone after Trump a bit, but they haven't spent as much money or done as much as they possibly could have to take on Trump directly, because when they do, he just turns around on them so viciously. And I thought it was pretty funny that the obligation to take on Trump by Republicans was the wealthiest campaign suddenly had this moral obligation to fight for the entire establishment. And it just seemed like class warfare to me.
You are correct. And I think one of the major things as well, and I'm sure you're already aware of this, but to the viewers out there, is that Jeb Bush was, rather than going for the win, as Christie put it, and as maybe Steve Schmidt put it on MSNBC, Jeb Bush decided that rather than attacking Donald Trump, and his super PAC decided rather than attacking Donald Trump, that they would instead go ahead and stab sideways, or in some cases downwards, at the other, quote, establishment candidates that they felt threatened by. So Marco Rubio, even though he's a right-wing Tea Partier, was seen as establishment. Jeb Bush has spent a monumental amount of money attacking Rubio. He spent a monumental amount of money attacking Christie. He spent a lot of money attacking even John Kasich. Jeb Bush has basically been stabbing all of the other people that could have been Jeb Bush in this case, who could have taken up that establishment moderate lane. And in the meantime, Ted Cruz and Donald Trump have just coasted. Yeah, if you think about it like the Tour de France, Donald Trump and Ted Cruz have been just basically trading wind from each other's sails, while everyone else is just way back in the pack. And so I think that, yes, that is a completely accurate analysis. Now, I know that Jeb Bush did try to attack Donald Trump a couple times early on. Believe it or not, there was a point in time when Jeb Bush was actually the front runner in the Republican nomination process. Now that is ancient history. But as he was first descending into the plummet of doom, into his 3% land, he lashed out at Donald Trump. And he was punished for it by Donald Trump. He was called low energy, among other things. And so on his way down, rather than becoming strategic, Jeb Bush just kind of lost his mind. Are we still on the air, Christy?
Yep, can you hear me?
I can, yeah. We're good. We're good. Your voice is a little cutty outy, but no problem whatsoever.
Yeah.
I can give a quick update, not to
please do.
filibuster here.
Say
30% right now on to Ted Cruz, and 29% for Donald Trump. Still only about 2,000, a little bit over 2,000 votes for each of those men. So it's just a very small snippet of the caucus goers. But now it looks like it's a pretty, once again, dead heat for Cruz and Trump. And then on the Clinton-Sanders side, it looks like it's still about 53 to 46 or 53 to 47 in favor of Clinton. So not much has changed, but the numbers have gone up a little bit. For example, on the Democratic side, it's with 21% of caucuses reporting. So that's a little bit more significant than the 9% that we were talking about earlier.
And I also want to say that your very important job is to watch the internet, because I'm watching the live stream and taking care of this, and also reminding people that if you have questions for us, you can click on your YouTube screen and be part of the Hangout, and that will take you to your Google Plus page. This live stream will be opened up as an event, and you'll be able to see on the Spotlight feature the links to the Real Clear Politics numbers that we use to inform our analysis. And also you can ask us questions. You can write them out and submit them, and you can also vote up or down. Apparently there should be an audience reaction, which questions are the best ones. So if you want to ask either of us a question, go ahead and jump in. And yes, Will, do please keep an eye on the numbers, because as they're coming in now, we're going to get a much better, clearer picture of how the final results are going to look. So I'll also
and
say,
if that sorry,
yeah.
I was just going to say, if that tendency on the Democratic side continues, we might have a projection pretty damn soon about who won the caucus. I don't know if that's going to hold out, but with 19% reporting and that number staying steady, it might be pretty soon before it's called for Hillary. But then again, if I'm wrong, that'll get played back to me a few times.
Well, I think it depends on what counties, and you can't see which counties are coming in, but I would want to see where the college students are turning out, for instance, before I would call that race.
Right, and it's those bigger counties that'll also take longer to report their numbers theoretically. So we'll just have to wait and see. I have a question for you, Christy, if that's okay.
Go right ahead.
I wonder how you feel, and this might be throwing you a curveball, let me know if it is, but I wonder how you feel about Ted Cruz's way of handling expectations in the last few weeks. There was basically the christening of Ted Cruz. Once he surged in Iowa, people said, wow, that's logical. Ted Cruz is going to win Iowa. And his campaign basically went along with it. And now we're seeing that he's being challenged from third place by Marco Rubio, and he's been pushed down by Donald Trump to where it's not so certain. And I was wondering what you think about the way he handled that situation.
I think that, I thought for a while Ted Cruz has been called one of the smarter men in the Senate because of his education and training. I've really have not seen that. He did his filibuster with no end goal, and it just ended up firing back on him. Then there was the problem of his debate performance. I'm sorry, I'm just going to mute you because I'm getting a little bit of scratchiness from your microphone.
Okay.
There we go. That should do it. No, it's telling me I can't use it. All right, never mind. And in the debate performance, he allowed himself to really be the center of some attacks and whined, and didn't come off very well. And those are things that are in his control. So I'm a little bit surprised that he chose to get into a fight with Governor Bradshaw over ethanol and to make it personal and call him part of the Washington establishment. I don't think that you insult the longest serving governor in the country,
Yeah.
a
You
fellow
don't call the
Republican.
longest serving governor the part of the Washington cartel.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so I think that he's handled all of this quite badly. The question is that going to matter to evangelicals? And if they're not farmers, I don't know that it will. So for people who are relying on ethanol, that will be a deciding factor. But for the evangelical base that are attracted to Carson and attracted to Cruz, it's hard to see whether or not they'll punish him for that. Now, in terms of the expectation game, I do think that he miscalculated by assuming that he would win based on polling numbers that were still 2 weeks out. I think he felt after he overtook Donald Trump in the polls that he was in a position to remain there for the rest of the caucuses. What he did not expect was to be called an anchor baby by Donald Trump and to have his eligibility questioned. And then, of course, there was the bad debate performance and the fight with the governor. All those things have happened subsequent to his prediction that he was going to come out on top. He also thought that the race was going to be over by March. So again, there's this image of Ted Cruz as being incredibly savvy and smart, but I don't think we're seeing it play out. Just in case is in the hangout, I just wanted to say to him, we're probably going to need Will to keep a closer eye on the results and to interrupt the conversation. So this might be a good time for you to jump in. I'll also message you with that. So are there any more updates now from the live feed that you can see, Will?
So there's no particular updates except that Democratic precincts reporting number jumped up to 25% without a change in the actual numbers between Clinton and Sanders, which right at the moment, is 53% Clinton, 47% roughly for Sanders, and that number hasn't changed from 9% up to 21% up to 25% of precincts reporting. On the Republican side, Ted Cruz has jumped up just a little bit, but it's still just a dead heat. It's 30% for him, 28% for Trump, and Rubio. Whoa, okay, something has changed. Wow, I can't believe I missed this. Rubio has jumped up to about 17 to 18%. Now, this is only with about 1,000 votes being counted, but still, if that is a trend that continues, then we'll be seeing Rubio beating expectations in Iowa, which is the perfect segue into what I wanted to talk about next with you, which is I think that the Rubio thing has been played up from day one by the media, and it's being played up even now. It was being played up this morning when I got up about people saying, well, maybe this is Rubio's moment. Maybe Rubio finally has his chance to shine. Meanwhile, John Kasich is a strong second in New Hampshire, or a strong third in New Hampshire, and no one's talking about that. In some polls, a strong second in New Hampshire, and no one is talking about that. And I'm just surprised that the media so quickly latches onto Marco Rubio rather than John Kasich, when they're both basically in similar positions, if not better, for John Kasich.
I would say that you're right. I think there is a sort of an insider track in the Washington media and establishment that just has always been more in love with Rubio than the base has. And they seem to be very wowed by his debate performances. Meanwhile, online polls are showing Donald Trump won those debates. So this is the disconnect that I think characterizes this race. The establishment has lost control. They no longer have their finger on the pulse of their own electorate anymore. And one of the things that I noticed when I was watching, so I had been away on holiday for several days and had limited bandwidth access. So I was binging on MSNBC news clips to get caught up with the various analyses that have been going on. And sorry, now I lost my train of thought a little bit while I said that, but
that's okay. You were just kind of like were a little bit distant during your holiday from the analysis. You were saying,
yes, getting all caught up, and the problem that the establishment, one of the characteristics that comes through is that the establishment really doesn't have a plan. They are disunited. They are fighting amongst themselves. They no longer have their fingers on the pulse of the electorate, and they seem to be a party establishment without a party. In some ways. And so I think the thing that will really, if Trump wins tonight or comes second and wins in New Hampshire and wins in South Carolina, is that we'll be facing, at least the establishment will be facing a clarifying moment of deciding who they are going forward. And if they can come to a consensus view of candidate they're going to get behind, then that would change the dynamics of the race. But if they continue this inter-establishment attacks on each other, Christie will probably drop out, I would imagine, after New Hampshire because he just doesn't have a path forward. But you could see Kasich sticking in, Jeb and Marco are going to go the distance. So you could see this dragging on for months, and all that time, it's meaning that Trump is getting plurality after plurality, and even leading up to the winner-take-all states after the 15th of March.
Mm-hmm. I think the one thing that maybe, so your analysis is spot on. I see no flaw in it, but I just add one little factor, and that is that if Jeb Bush does absolutely horrible in New Hampshire, I don't think he'll wait out for South Carolina. I really don't. I could be wrong, but what that means is that once Jeb Bush drops, a lot of the people and the establishment fundraiser types that were supporting him, even though they knew he was a losing candidate just because he had the Bush name, will feel more free to support someone else. And so there might be that 11th minute push that is so unlikely but also totally possible on the Republican side. But you're totally right. This is, at the moment, as a totally scattered establishment that's risking everything. It's like trying to herd a bunch of cats in New Hampshire to vote for the establishment. There's a good chance it won't happen.
And they're spending millions to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely
Spending millions. I mean, I think I saw something yesterday that said that if you divided out the number of votes that Jeb Bush would likely be receiving in the Iowa caucus, and you divide that from the amount he spent, then he was looking at about $6,000 per voter that he was getting on caucus night.
Well, I see Kevin has joined us for the non-American viewpoint tonight. Hey, Kevin, how you doing?
Hello there, democracy fans. How are we?
Hey.
So, Will, Kevin, Will.
Hi, nice to meet you.
So before we do anything else, Will, would you like to check the computer? So now hopefully Kevin and I can have a little bit of a banter, and you can listen in and jump in as you want, but keep more of an eye on the results on CNN and stuff. Yes.
Ted Cruz has pulled up a little bit ahead, and it's much more significant now, 30% to 28%, with a 400 vote lead. But we're in the 5,000 vote count now. About 26% of caucuses have reported. Or I'm sorry, wait a minute. Is that 26%? That is 12% of caucuses reporting, with Ted Cruz a slight lead over Donald Trump. But again, subject to change, but we are seeing some moves. And it actually just updated on me again. Sorry, I'll let you guys talk after this. 30% to 27% with about 5,000 votes a person. So those numbers are becoming more significant as we speak.
And we should also say that the turnout could be anywhere between 130,000 people turning out to 155. So, we are looking at pretty early days, and again, potentially rural areas. So we'll have to see if Donald Trump does better in this.
And as much as I love to coin myself an expert, I do sometimes just tend to go ahead and see what the CNN people are saying, because I've been watching their election coverage since I was a kid. Their people are really good, and their current headline on their front page is that early Democratic voting or early Democratic results show Clinton with a tight lead. So that means, to me, that tells me that they're seeing a tendency, they're seeing a trend, but they're not gonna say that she's winning yet. Yeah.
Very wise move. So, Kevin, give us some of your perspective sitting over in Europe as to how this looks from the outside.
Well, I mean, in a word, crazy. But if you want slightly more advanced than that, a thing that struck me, the kind of charming, folksy idea that the people of Iowa are these kind of delightful, kind of folksy, charming people. And yet they've gone seemingly will go for Trump. But the idea that he's essentially sort of torn up the rule book, and it's fascinating to watch, because he's essentially, it gets to the point where you think, what does he have to do? Kill someone live on TV before his numbers go down? It's fascinating to see, anyway.
Well, Kevin, to be honest with you, it was Trump very literally said a week ago, direct quote, he said that I could go onto Fifth Avenue in New York City, shoot a man, and my poll numbers would go up. That's a direct quote from Donald Trump. So he knows. He knows exactly what you're saying, and you're totally right. He's played the media like a fiddle.
Yeah.
There's a great piece in Politico. There's a great piece in Politico. It's rather long form, but it starts with Trump's announcement setting up of his candidacy. People had approached him to run for governor. He said, no, I'm going to run for president. But I highly recommend people go and watch it, because in there, supposedly he knew from the start that he was going to get all kinds of free media, that he would suck up all the oxygen in the room, that he would generate headlines every day to keep the story about him from the beginning. So depending on whether or not this is just a reinterpretation of events as they happen to, basically describing what happened and then saying, oh yeah, I planned it all along, or if he did have this plan, it does show that it's really upset the way that traditional politics has been done.
Well, I think the point that was made earlier about the Republican Party completely, or the establishment losing complete control over its over the base and over losing connection with the base of the party now, to the point where Donald Trump can come in and essentially flip the bird to all of them and is loved by the party. The party establishment have essentially lost control. The insane are running the asylum, basically. It seems to me, anyway.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth mentioning that Trump is getting maybe 30%, 35% of the GOP base, and the GOP base represents about 28% of the American population. So a big factor in Trump's success is the fact that he is running in such a crowded field. And there is, in the media, I think definitely, when watching Morning Joe, is a tendency to conflate the Republican base with the entire American population and think that people in the states more generally are going to respond to Trump in the way that the base has, which I think is a real fallacy of an ecological fallacy that they're performing there.
Yeah, and I think a similar problem will be faced by whoever comes out of this, whatever monster they've had to make themselves in order to get past the Republican primaries, in order to try and row back to the centre ground. It's just going to be even more difficult. If you remember Mitt Romney, and he really didn't even have to go anywhere near as extreme as Trump has, or at times even Cruz and Rubio have. And he had an absolutely awful time trying to row back to the centre ground. And I can't see, they're so far off into the distance now, I can't see them getting anywhere near it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, Trump does not do well with independents. When you look at where the polling is in terms of issue preferences, the median voter or the independent voter is much closer Trump. So I think that is one of the reasons why the Republican Party is worried about the effect of Trump down ticket, because people will turn out to vote against Trump. Like people turned out in 2008 to vote for Barack Obama, there will be a lot of people who will be motivated to get registered to vote just to vote against Donald Trump. And that will have an impact on the Senate and the House and governor's races and state races as well. So just so Will, because you're keeping an eye on the internet and updates, you can, just like in a news report, just break in at any time with new news.
Right. There's nothing particularly new. The Democrats are up to 36% of precincts reporting. Clinton is holding her lead, in fact, building it a bit over Bernie Sanders. She's got about 51.5% to Bernie Sanders' 47.9%. And on the Republican side, with about 16% of precincts reporting, Cruz has pulled up a little bit ahead of Donald Trump by a little bit more than 2 points, 29.8% to 27.3%. But once again, that's not too telling on the Republican side of how that's going to go. One little tendency I have seen on the map so far is that the western part of Iowa is trending more towards Trump, where it looks like the area around Des Moines in the center, the more urban area, is trending towards Cruz. I don't know if there was an urban-rural divide originally projected between Cruz and Trump, but there may be one playing out at this moment, and we'll see what that means as the race moves forward tonight.
Will, that was so professional. I'm very impressed.
That was good. That was very good. But I think what we're starting to see from the numbers, I think the numbers coming in on the Democratic side seem significant enough that I think we can begin to draw our conclusions, so to speak. And I think I don't want to say delusions because that seems harsh, but the overconfidence amongst the base of Bernie supporters is coming home to roost now. I think I think a lot of them were very, very confident that they were going to do much better here, and they had to do much better here to have any real chance. Because as was discussed earlier, I was listening in the South, Hillary could very well clean up, and that's
one of my greatest frustrations as a Bernie Sanders supporter were at times when I would want to talk about information, when I would want to talk about polls, when I want to talk about strategy and how Bernie Sanders can go on to win the nomination, because it's a difficult path, even with a win in Iowa tonight. I remember I would be people would get angry at you for questioning the idea that, he wasn't polling ahead in Iowa, or they'd tell you that the polls themselves were corrupted. That's not to say that every poll is a perfect reflection of the electorate, far from it. But the idea that we can't even take the data that's available to us and make some conjectures about the future was incredibly frustrating. And it reminded me a little bit of the groupthink that went on during the Ron Paul revolution in 2012. Yeah. And so I totally agree with you, Kevin. I think your point's correct. I think that there was a good chance of Iowa being a Bernie Sanders state, but the delusion that it was just going to be easy or that it was surefire is definitely being shattered, at least at this moment, with, right now with Clinton with a slight edge over Bernie Sanders of about 4 points.
Yeah, I think the comparison to Ron Paul is absolutely precise, and to a lesser extent with Rand Paul, that kind of almost, and again, I don't want to, it might sound harsh because, Bernie Sanders' politics is much more akin to mine. I'd like him to be electable. I'd like him to do well. I just don't see that he is. And unfortunately, I think a lot of his supporters either willingly blind themselves to this or are just ignorant to it. Like you say, it's an incredibly difficult road. And the idea that you can just get by on this kind of idea of revolution. Revolutions don't happen all that often, and they don't happen very easily. There would be a peaceful revolution or otherwise,
You're right. That being said, there is something amiss. There's a revolution on the Republican side, for sure. I think we can conclusively say that the Republicans are, as we called them earlier, maybe a stagecoach without a horse or a driver, I can't recall, but the loonies are running the loony bin. But there is a revolution on the Republican side. The idea that there could be one on the Democratic side might not be as far-fetched as you say, but it was never going to be easy at all. Christy, what do you think?
Well, before I jump in, I want to just promote again, if anyone has questions for us, to click on the link on your YouTube channel, be part of the Hangout, and then I've clicked that link to show you what it would be like after you click it. So I'm going to share my screen here, and go entire screen. And when you do that, what comes up is your Google Play page. The video will come up here, and then you can see the showcase items I've set up, the Real Clear Politics things, and you can also submit your questions here. So if you want to go ahead and do that by clicking on this, you can see it. There. Oh, I'm sorry. You can hear us there, and mute that. You just hit that and submit a question there, and you click that, write your question, and then we'll see it. So that's all I wanted to do. Now I have to stop sharing the screen. Stop.
Okay, Christy, I'm going to jump in real quick and just give a quick update. Not a whole lot's changed on the Clinton side. She's got about 51.5% of the vote to Bernie Sanders' 48%. That's with now 40% of the precincts reporting. However, CNN still hasn't called that race, so it means that there's probably still some urban or university towns that have yet to report. On the Republican side, 30% to 27.2%. Cruz over Trump with about 18% of precincts reporting. At this moment, looks like it's going to be really close. And I think the big story coming out of tonight actually is not going to be Clinton over Sanders or Cruz over Trump, but rather that third-place Marco Rubio finish. Not because I think that he deserves that attention, but I think the media is going to focus in on the fact that he is trending at this moment to hit 8%, which is way above the 12% that he was polling at last week.
It would be a great night for Marco Rubio. It would give him some justification for going to New Hampshire and trying to make it, place second there, get a silver medal instead of the bronze in a state that would be more, he should do well with evangelicals, Marco Rubio. And he's also was a Tea Party darling, so he's got some of the connections. He should be a better candidate than he really is, but I think that has to do with the size of the GOP field in some ways. Now, did you want me to go back to the original question, or otherwise I was going to ask Kevin about his politics, and you mentioned before that Bernie is your side, so I was wondering if you guys don't want to continue on that topic, was just ask Kevin about what he sees about Sanders that he likes, because I know a lot of my viewers are Sanders fans, and as a Clinton fan, I want to make sure I get a lot of equal time here for Sanders people.
No, Christy, I was asking that question to you just because I didn't want you to think I was filibustering your live stream. Oh. So please go ahead and ask any question you'd like.
No, because I am ill, and like I said, on cold medicines and stuff, I'm quite happy to kind of be more of a moderator and jump in and do color commentary and bring Kevin on as someone else as a guest, and then have you read off the news updates. I think this is a good trifecta, because if you were watching the screen, I would have to fill a lot more time than I am. So Kevin, I'm throwing that question out to you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a Bernie supporter in terms of if we want to look at sort of ideals or whatever, because he calls himself a socialist, isn't really. He's a social democrat, which is sort of where I'm at. And so, like I say, I'd like him to be electable, but I genuinely don't think he really is. And so essentially, by default, almost you become a Hillary supporter, even though I'm not a massive fan of her at all. But if it stops. Like I say, whichever monster gets created out of the Republican primaries from becoming president, that would be a huge thing to do. Because, like I say, whoever comes out of this, even if Rubio comes through the pack as the result seems to suggest he might be able to do, he's still not my cup of tea. We'll put it that way. And Hillary really is the only realistic option to stop him, or to stop whomever comes out.
Thanks for that.
Supplement. Well, just to supplement what Kevin was saying, Rubio is being seen as this establishment alternative, but really, Rubio is just as conservative in Tea Party as Ted Cruz is, and to see which one of them was more conservative in the last debate. In the Rubio, if it is Cruz, the two alternatives to Trump, you're still looking at someone who openly went on television to talk about how the Bible will lead them in their decisions as president. You'll be looking at people who want to rescind the create law that would rescind it, or more importantly, maybe more Supreme Court justices that will overturn those kinds of rulings. It's deeply conservative and people who as much spending in tax cuts as Bernie Sanders would in tax raises for university or for healthcare. Your feed is breaking. So
maybe you have to close something out that might be playing in the background just to make sure, or pause it or something while you're talking. So.
Okay.
Now, as you were talking, I looked over at my Huffington Post real live updates, and the numbers, they don't give it as a percentage, but the numbers that they have here have Trump at this is just up to Ted Cruz at 9,859 and Trump at 8,935. Clinton at 277 and Bernie at 261. Martin O'Malley at 3. Those are percentages, so it's and I don't like to do math in public.
The Martin O'Malley candidacy, it seems so baffling. What is his raison d'etre in this regard? What is he hoping to achieve? I really don't get it at all.
That's an excellent question. I don't have an answer. Do you, Will?
You're the vice president, and his whole pitch. I hate to dump on him like that, but everybody who was running, Jim Webb, Martin O'Malley, that's what they do. They run as the presidential on the trail. That's what Joe Biden did in 2008, and it paid off for him. And people like Chris Dodd, for example, was another person who did something similar in 2008. They put their name in the race, but didn't really try that hard. They were just hoping to get that second slot.
Well, speaking of that, who do you think Hillary, Bernie, and Trump would have as their VP candidates? I mean, obviously, it would be very, very hard for us to predict this. Speculation. How do you see each of those three balancing out?
Is that for me or for Kevin?
I guess Will first, because I don't know if Kevin feels so au fait. He might want to listen to us and then have some ideas while he's listening.
I have a couple of jokey suggestions.
You want to do those first?
Who's going?
Sorry, Kevin. Did you want to do your jokey ones first then?
Well, the concept of having like a vice president as a kind of bumbling sideshow to take the heat off the president. How could Donald Trump possibly get anyone that would make Donald Trump look less of an idiot?
Sarah Palin.
Oh,
good God.
Okay. Jeez. That wasn't. Those weren't jokes at all. Those were just depressing ideas. Okay. So. For
politics, yeah.
For Hillary, I'm pretty confident that it will be one of the Castro brothers from Texas, either Joaquin or Julian Castro. Those are my bold predictions. One of them was a congressman from Texas, and one of them was the mayor of San Antonio. One of them currently, I can't remember which one, actually works in the Obama administration. They're Hispanics. They're from Texas. They're from the South. They kind of give youth and a Hispanic tinge to Hillary that she doesn't currently have, especially if Rubio is the nominee. That will be important. On the Trump side, I would predict that Donald Trump is going to do something no one expects, which means I predict that he's going to nominate a Democrat or someone, a Democrat, maybe an independent maverick to be his running mate, because he's going to jerk so hard to the middle. He's already proved that he's malleable and doesn't care about ideology. As far as Rubio goes, I have no idea. Someone old.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing with Trump. You know, it's going to be a wild card. It's definitely not going to be some sort of establishment pick. It's going to be someone completely out of the blue, like someone you really couldn't even hazard a guess at. It seems, you know.
Yeah. I mean, people are saying Cruz. I think that's foolish, because I think once Trump wins the nomination, if he does, then he will forget Iowa caucus voters and Republican primary voters faster than you can write the headline that he's won the nomination. He's going to run so far to the middle that it'll hurt your neck from the whiplash.
Yeah.
I was initially saying that Cruz would be a good VP pick for him to balance out that evangelical base, but now that he's questioned his eligibility, I don't think he can now go back and
that's
VP candidate.
Yeah, that's the point, and I think it was similar in the last election cycle as well. Actually, the Republican Party. Or the Republican field have spent so much time tearing each other down that I don't think it's realistic that they could have another one of the actual the field as their VP, because the quotes that are going to be out there about whether they were eligible or they were too softly spoken or they were just generally, unqualified for the position. It's just it'd be too much of an open goal for whomever they're against.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Kevin. I do have some numbers updates. Ted Cruz is sitting on about 30%. Trump is 24% of precincts reporting, and Rubio is. Hillary still has an edge over Sanders by about 3 points.
If you have the CNN one running, can you pause that or close it and read off the numbers again? Because your feed broke up a lot while you were reading those numbers off. I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm just looking at Real Clear Politics. So I'll put it short. Cruz, 29%, almost 30%. Trump, 27%. Clinton, 51%. And Sanders, 48%.
That's great. So, and did they say how many are reporting at that point?
On the Democratic side, we have over 50% reported, and on the Republican side, we have 24% reported. That's according to Real Clear Politics.
Yep. Yeah, and other than AP, I think that's a pretty up-to-date source. So, unless, I'm not checking. I just use the Huffington Post, but I don't have Twitter up or anything like that. One of the things that did come up was I noticed. Hey, I went on Twitter, and there was a lot of activity from Sanders voters about Iowa. And I kind of reflected, people aren't checking Twitter about their voting. You know, that happens in real life. You need to get off Twitter and actually go to people.
Yeah, that's another way in which the comparison with Ron Paul is exactly the same. If you just judged by Twitter and Facebook and, the sort of internet politosphere or whatever you want to call it, you would think that Ron Paul was going to absolutely run away with the nomination last time out. And if you went by the same standards, but obviously on the left, you would have Bernie Sanders as a clear winner. But that's not reflected in real life, and that's, I think, partly where that kind of delusion comes from.
There is political science research, and I know one of the people who is doing it at Strathclyde on linking up social media use with candidate performance. And in the U.S., in general elections, and of course this is very early days because I think we only had 2 general elections with Twitter being the kind of social media force that it is. But there is a correlation between social media activity and a candidate's performance in the election. But that's a general election, and I think in a primary, especially where Bernie Sanders supporters tend to be disproportionately younger than Clinton supporters, I don't know that the social are really.
Well, I mean, you broke up slightly there, but I think I got the general gist of your point. And I think that's partly where the Sanders supporters do fall down, or will fall down the campaign, because you can't put, as was you previously elucidated earlier, that young people don't vote. As much as you might try and get them out and all the rest of it, they just don't turn up anywhere near the sort of numbers that more adult sort of aged people do. And so if you're going to build your base around that, I think it's just you're building on quicksand.
Mm-hmm. Can I jump in here for a second? Because we do have the first candidate statement of the night in regards to the results, and it's from Ben Carson.
Ooh.
Who sent fourth place in Iowa, and there were some rumors that he was already planning on dropping out tonight. And we have a communications director statement saying that no, Ben Carson is going to go home and get a fresh set of clothes. He will be departing Des Moines and looks forward to debates in New Hampshire and South Carolina. So that's the first concession, so to speak, from Ben Carson, who I assume didn't have a pep rally because he already knew he was going to lose. That's the update I wanted to give.
There is a phenomenon that happens on the political right in the United States that just does not happen on the left, which is the industry around professional candidates. Sarah Palin is an example. Ben Carson is an example. Newt Gingrich, Mike Huckabee, and these guys are and women are in it not because they're actually serious about being in politics. It's because they see it as a way to make money. They write shitty books and then they sell good books. Written books, and so they think they're deep. They have, they keep mailing advertising house in order. They keep consultants, in money, and it's basically just a way to transfer wealth from small dollar donors and big dollar donors into private pockets with no real results.
Yeah, well, the amount of money that gets spent in U.S. elections is just to the non-American eye is just utterly obscene. And most of it's utterly wasted. As you were discussing earlier, the Jeb Bush money, and he spent, again, obscene sums of money and done nothing with it. It's just been utterly wasted.
It's going to be projected on television ads alone.
Yeah, you're breaking up again, Will. Sorry, I don't know if you have something you can pause. Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I think we missed all of that, so you might have to say again about the total amount spent for the U.S. race.
Okay. Sorry, I'll say it again. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. $3.3 billion will be spent on television ads in the 20 cycle alone. So just...
Yeah, the TV industry is a major beneficiary of the Murdoch and Fox News and all of their affiliates and all the ABC and NBC and CBS and other affiliates that sell the airtime, premium airtime, especially to PACs, have no incentive to see the race change because the structure change because they are so they benefit so directly from it.
And also political operatives make a lot of money in these sorts of things. There's a whole industry of people who show up every 4 years and make a living off of the primaries.
Yeah, it's a huge industry, isn't it?
It is. And actually, that one of the other things we didn't get to talk about yet was Jeff Rowe, who is Ted Cruz's campaign manager, sent out presumably this mailer. Did y'all hear about this Ted Cruz mailer?
I did, but why don't you, for the people in the audience who haven't, describe what it was, and do you know the political psychology research behind it?
I don't know the political psychology research behind it. You'll have to go ahead and fill...
All right, so I'll do that bit. I'll do that bit, and you do the mailer bit, and let me know if I break up at all. I've closed out all of my windows and everything that I could, so it's just us on the room, so I'm really relying on you, Will. Okay.
Yep.
So political psychology has looked at things that encourage people to vote, and they've done experimental things in some non-important, non-partisan races, where they actually go and put out mailers in constituencies, and then look to see if it's had an impact on the way that people have turned out. And they also do focus group research on people's reaction to being exposed to political messages. What some researchers, whose name I can't remember, I apologize, found was that when you told people in a focus group that What if you knew that, or did you know that people, that you're going to the polls is public information, and that people could go and look up to check to see whether or not you voted, and if you found out that people in your neighborhood were voting more often than you, would you feel more obligated to vote? And they said yes. Mm-hmm. So the psychology behind this is that it's kind of like checking up on you, saying, you know, you're getting a failing grade on your vote turnout compared with your neighbors, because your neighbors turned out in 7 of the last 8 elections and you've only turned out in 2. Or giving people the impression that somehow the fact that they failed to vote will reflect badly on them and their social status. So that's what the researchers found experimentally. And now you can, Will, if you want to talk about how campaigns have kind of mistakenly taken this and tried to apply it in real life.
So this is a real-life example of what Christy was just talking about from Ted Cruz's campaign last week. And Ted Cruz is all about turnout, but only for evangelicals. Ted Cruz wants evangelicals to turn out and for the caucus to look basically like 2012. And anything above 2012 turnout would be advantageous to Donald Trump. So what Cruz's campaign did was targeted a neighborhood or a series of neighborhoods where lots of evangelicals, Cruz voters, were located, and they sent out this mailer. It says on the very front in big red letters, voting violation. And then it says in the back, you are receiving this election notice because low expect your voter turnout in your area. Your individual voting history, as well as your neighbors, are public record. Their scores are published below, and many of them will see your score as well. Caucus on Monday to improve your score. So obviously, what you were saying, Christy, to the extreme in what would likely be called the dirtiest move so far of the 2016 race.
Yeah, that's so pathetic, isn't it? That's such disingenuous sort of almost bullying. It's horrendous.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Kevin.
No, I was just saying it's essentially, it seems like a kind of almost a bullying tactic.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that, you know,
reminiscent of 2000 probably.
Yeah, the psychology behind it, you know, the way that it's been applied is unfortunate, but the fact is that you can probably take a message like that and wrap it up with something more positive like civic duty. And especially in the Republican side, where so many people love to wrap themselves up with the flag and go on and on about veterans, I think you could take something like that and say, you know, turnout on your street is higher than in other parts of the states, or lower than other parts of the state. And as our men and women are bravely sacrificing, we need to do our part here to make sure that we're engaging the activities that they're defending our freedoms for. So I think that there are ways that you can take that peer pressure and that notion of conforming your behavior in a positive way using civic duty, but that's not what the Cruz people decided to do with that information.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me a bit, and sorry, I don't mean to interrupt anybody. I think I'm just on a bit of a lag, but I think it's reminiscent of the 2000 race in South Carolina between McCain and Bush. John McCain was doing really well in New Hampshire, and George Bush needed to come back in South Carolina. And either his campaign or some of his surrogates put out phone calls that said to voters, would you be more or less likely to support John McCain if you knew that he had a bastard black baby? Which of course is patently false. He has an adopted child who happens to be black, but it was just this style of dirty campaign, I think, really comes from the age of Karl Rove and now is being translated into 2016 with this Cruz mailer.
And that was one reason I heard that Bush might not get out of the race, because South Carolina is a place that has saved the Bush family in the past. Mm-hmm. And dirty tricks like that are among the reasons. So, we'll have to see what Jeb decides.
Let me give a quick update, and then we can move the conversation on. Clinton with 51% of the vote still, Sanders 48.5% of the vote, 59% of precincts reporting. That's holding steady so far. On the Republican side, Cruz ahead now by 3 points, 29.4% to 26.3% over Trump, with Rubio pushing all the way to 20%. Total precincts counted is 36%. And neither CNN nor Fox News nor MSNBC is calling the race at this moment?
Well, this is turning out to be a very interesting night, especially since it's
It
only
is.
36% on the Republican side. So I'm quite interested to see what counties I'm half tempted to go over and look to see if Chuck Todd has the map of Iowa out and the counties in different colors. But yeah, that's what I'm kind of wondering now is how is.
Well, that's what I was looking at earlier with John King. John King had the western precincts coming in for Trump, and then Polk County was coming in for Cruz. I can tell you that MSNBC already has Marco Rubio as their headline photograph on their website. So that media narrative is already being played out as we speak.
Yeah, that could be the real beginnings of the real story on the Republican side there, because this could be, I think, as was discussed earlier, there's very few people would have Donald Trump as like a second choice. You're either very pro him or very against him. And I think there's a certain case of that with Cruz as well. And so the idea that you could have a much more establishment sort of figure come through the pack, which always seemed like it would happen, but this is the first sort of inklings of it actually happening. I think that could be the real story to come out of tonight.
This might come back to bite Marco Rubio in the ass because New Hampshire isn't for another 2 weeks yet. And that gives people a lot of time to train their guns in the establishment lane on the person they feel is sticking their neck out, plus for Donald Trump to come along and really have another go at Rubio like he did before. So winning in Iowa or coming in third in Iowa for Rubio might be setting himself up for tripping himself up the way that Cruz did by peaking too early before when he hit his stride in Iowa.
True, but I mean, considering the fact that he wasn't, I don't think many people had him as one of the main contenders of the race. The fact that he's been able, seemingly, to drag himself back into that discussion, I think has to be a positive for his campaign, a huge positive.
And I would be more sympathetic to your argument, Christy, if it was anything other than third place. If he hit first place, then I would say yes. New Hampshire likes to be independent. New Hampshire voters like to just kind of be like the angsty teenager who does the opposite of what they expect. But third place is kind of, even if the media talks about it, it's not intimidating, I would say, to New Hampshire voters. But that's just my pure conjecture at this moment. By the way, that 20% is bumped up to 20.2.
Okay. I think it would depend on how Marco did then in the following polls in New Hampshire, because right now, Jeb Bush had a recent spike, Chris Christie had an earlier spike, Kasich was having a spike. Maybe it's time for Marco to have a bit of a spike in New Hampshire. The question is, can he turn that spike into a line, not just an up and down kind of phenomenon inside the polling data? That's my view, anyway. All right. Oh, it looks like we lost Will. So, Kevin, you're going to have to chat a little bit in order to fill up some of this time.
I don't mind. I don't think I can bring you numbers or the kind of actual incisive insight to stuff, but I can chat away if you wish.
Well, maybe you want to talk a little bit about any parallels you see between Trump and parties in the UK, and the similarity in the rhetoric and the similarities in the responses.
Well, there aren't really, because I think across the board, he's even on relatively sort of mainstream news outlets, he's seen as something of a joke, even though people know full well that he's the front runner and that he has a very good shot at actually getting the nomination. People still see him as a joke because of the extremism. And
but
there was obviously
some parallels between him and Farage, leader of the Unionist Party.
Yeah, there's the same sort of jingoistic BS, but I think part of the difference is, I know that Trump isn't necessarily running as like the religious guy, but there's that massive difference that even the kind of playing to the crowd people here in Britain, no one talks about religion in the way that American politicians basically have to talk about religion, which is a complicating factor in a number of ways, because like you say, the idea of who's courting the evangelical vote isn't an issue in Britain. And so you have a much more straightforward, less crazy-sounding rhetoric, even from those who deal with crazy-sounding rhetoric.
So as someone who was, or is an American and lived in the U.S. and was in the UK for the last, I guess, 2 elections, I was there in 2005 as well, so 3. But I see a lot of parallels between the way that people connected with Nigel Farage in terms of finding him the most engaging politician on the stage. And even if they didn't always agree with what he had to say, they liked hearing him talk and felt like he would be a guy that you would bump into in the pub, and he would be standing there outside with a cigarette and a pint, and you could have a laugh with him even if you didn't agree with him. And I see that connection being made as well with Donald Trump and his voters.
I think I see what you mean, but I think it's a lot more difficult to see him as like an ordinary guy in the street when he turns up in your town in a private jet with Trump in 20-foot high letters on the side of it. I don't think he has the kind of that common touch feel that Farage maybe has. But yeah, I think there's probably that same element of like you think you could have like a laugh and a joke with Trump in a way that you probably couldn't with a number of the kind of more stuffy establishment figures, the kind of people who've been in the Senate or in Congress or whatever.
And UKIP did get 4 million votes.
True, but I mean, I as much as they didn't do too bad in terms of increasing their share of the popular vote, I'd be more than happy for Donald Trump to fail in the way that UKIP have, basically.
Yeah, go ahead, Will.
Oh, I was just going to say the parallel that I was thinking of earlier with UK politics was perhaps we were talking about underpolling earlier, and the fact that Donald Trump was polling better online rather than over the phone reminded me a little bit of the underpolling of the Conservative Party during the 2015 general in the UK. You know, back at that time, I remember just going based on the polling that I predicted that Labour would be coalitioning with the Scottish National Party, and it turned out that people were voting for Conservative and just not telling anyone.
Yeah, it's a phenomenon called shy toy syndrome. And sorry, Kevin, I'm going to step in and play British politics because I was a graduate teaching assistant on the course for it. But the shy toy syndrome is one of the plagues of British polling, and it was part of the reason why they also had real problems with the election of 1997, I think. And we also found in our focus groups that it was really difficult to recruit conservatives. And in our next research agenda, we actually are making an effort to go into conservative areas specifically to recruit conservative respondents in order to more accurately understand their political preferences. But yeah, this underreporting and or refusal to participate is certainly a challenge for polling moving forward. And then Kevin, go ahead on the topic.
Oh well, I was just going to like you say, a lot of people sort of almost are embarrassed, I think, to say that they're voting Tory, which I think is a big difference between conservatism in Britain and conservatism in America. That you have, I think, there are fewer very, very openly sort of proud conservatives in Britain, even though they vote for conservative candidates in just the same sort of numbers, really.
Well, I'll finish up and then I have a follow-on to that.
No, I will yield the floor.
Okay. Well, yes, when it comes to that non-reporting, one of the big challenges moving forward in polling is going to be to go online and internet polling. And so it will be interesting to see if younger people who are in the conservative bent are going to be more likely to participate on an online poll than a telephone survey because they're just used to being online more. But that's a modal transition that we're trying to make as a discipline that isn't. We're in a really rough stage now, sort of transitioning between telephone polls being pretty accurate to now moving into a digital age where we have to maybe get representative panels and recruit people and pay them money and not just expect everyone to give their opinions away for free. But on your issue of being an out Tory, one of the things that we definitely noticed in the focus groups was that it was the Labour supporters and the people on the left who would get very loud and aggressive and very personal and in some ways sort of make people who are voting Conservative answer for the Conservative Party. And we had to intervene more often to calm down a left person than a right-leaning person in our focus groups. And that, I think, dynamic is a little bit different. I think you have more the Trump people being the loud ones, on the Republican side, and I think you've got the Sanders people being more loud on the left. And just because you don't hear the Hillary supporters doesn't mean they're there. So I think that there is lessons about shy Tory syndrome that could be applied to the Democratic primary, and maybe less so to the Trump primary.
Can I jump in here with numbers?
Please do.
So the Democrats have 66% of precincts reporting, and Hillary is up 50.8 over Bernie Sanders at 48%. So that's still where it was basically with margin. The Republican side has become Cruz has pulled ahead by almost 4 points now. Donald Trump, almost 29% to 25%, probably going to be
Sorry, Will, you're really breaking up again, so I'm going to have to interrupt and ask
who
you
is
to start over again.
now moved even further.
It's funny because we're both in the same country, and yet, Will, I'm having a harder time with your feed than Kevin's.
Well, I feel I kind of want to fill in the. All right, are we still talking?
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to just mute him really quickly and see if that works. Okay. And then hopefully he'll come back. He's kind of frozen in the bottom, so sorry to the viewers here, just some technical problems. Hopefully we'll get over them really quick.
These problems weren't weren't in the room before I. Shall I drop out and see if that solves the problem?
Well, yeah, it's been great having you on, and we appreciate it. And yeah, and if it clears up, we might try it again. I'll message you on Facebook if we can get it under control.
Okay, now you're breaking up. I'm the only one left in the room.
So yeah, why don't we go ahead and say goodbye?
It was lovely talking to you.
Okay,
Enjoy.
yeah, just don't end the call. Just close the window.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. So now it looks like it's just me and 17 viewers. Hey guys. So I imagine Will is going to try to get back into the room because he lost his connection. So in the meantime, I guess one of the things that we can talk about until Will gets back with some updates is what if Cruz wins? And if I heard him correctly, it sounded like Ted Cruz had expanded his lead to 4 points. And if that holds steady or grows over the course of the night, then Ted Cruz has basically really come back and beat expectations because people were putting him second and also downplaying talking up his candidacy, as Will and I were discussing earlier. So what would that mean for him going into New Hampshire? That's a little bit harder to say. Excuse me, guys, because he's not doing particularly well in New Hampshire. It's a state where there are fewer evangelical voters, and there are more independent type, moderate and conservative or fiscal conservative types rather than the more moral issue types. So I'm going to see really quick here, guys. Sorry, I'm going to resend the link to Will in our Facebook message just to make sure he's got it. So I'm going to have to multitask here while I do it. My apologies. So I think Ted Cruz's opportunities, state that he would need to be looking at would be South Carolina, because that's the next state where he's got a really big base of evangelicals that he could potentially work with. Right now, the latest polling from that state has Donald Cruz up around 35%, or in the 30s. Now that state isn't polled as often as New Hampshire has been or as Iowa has been. So it's a little bit harder to say precisely kind of where Trump supporters are and whether or not Ted Cruz would have an opportunity to really pick up evangelical voters in South Carolina. I think a lot of that might depend on whether or not Ben Carson has to really stay in the race, or if a 4th place showing in Iowa makes his candidacy redundant, in which case those evangelical voters would have a natural home in Ted Cruz in terms of his discussions about. He's recently, I want to say the Washington Post, but that might not have been it, talking about, oh no, it might have been Raw Story, talking about the extent to which Ted Cruz's campaign events are more like revivals and less like a traditional campaign, and that he makes a real effort to bring up his faith, to bring up Jesus, and also he has a prayer sometimes at the end of his events, when he goes to town halls or when he has events at local coffee shops or whatever else when he's on the road. And so his ties with that community would give him a real natural constituency to fight against Trump if Carson does drop out or become so irrelevant that his voters are seeking someplace more tactically important to place their votes. Right, so I'm still filling airtime, and 13 of you are still watching. That's fantastic, but without Will, I'm a little bit at a loss to get some information. Oh, is he back?
Hey.
Oh, thank goodness, I just ran out of things to talk about.
Well,
I was reviewing the implications of a Ted Cruz win, saying that I don't think he's going to do much in the way of New Hampshire, but that if he places solidly in first, he would be well positioned to go into South Carolina and suck up any Cruz supporters. I'm sorry, any Carson supporters who are looking for a more a place to put their vote where it would make more of a difference.
I think that's a really good analysis, and I think the real question is, was that message from the Carson campaign earlier that he's just going to continue on into South Carolina, into New Hampshire, was that in earnest, or was that just for show? Because if Carson does end up dropping out, if Fiorina drops out, their endorsements will become incredibly valuable moving forward.
That's very true. Now, since you were cutting out a lot the last time, why don't you give us the most recent numbers for the 13 viewers who are hanging on your every update?
Woo, hello, 13 viewers. Don't want to let you down. 69% of precincts on the Democratic side have reported. Is my audio clear?
Yes, your audio is just fine and uninterrupted. It's great.
Okay. Clinton is still leading over Bernie Sanders, 50.8% to 48.7%. Cruz is still leading Trump, 28.7% to 25.2%, with 59% of precincts reporting. And Rubio has increased again, 21.2% is where he's sitting right now. So again, the story of the night looks like that Cruz is going to actually end up pulling out that Iowa win after all, perhaps, and that Rubio is going to finish a strong third place. But CNN, Fox, MSNBC, no one's calling either race yet for any of the candidates.
I guess I could say a little bit about how I feel about this result as someone who supports Hillary, which is it's a good start, but it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think the fact that the race so far is within 2 points, as you predicted, or about there, shows how intense the discussion within the party and the base is. I think that conversation should continue, and I hope it focuses more on issues than on personalities. But yeah, I think that I'm pleased with this, but I also think that this is just the first step of many.
I think once again that's a good point. I think that Sanders supporters, if I can speak to them real quick, need to not take New Hampshire for granted now. Hillary Clinton ran a comeback in 2008 against Barack Obama in New Hampshire and ended up winning that state. And despite Sanders' big lead there in the polls, Iowa does have a tendency to change things. Not necessarily New Hampshire in this case, but it is a possibility. And so going forward, like Christy said, this is going to be a marathon for our nominee to be selected. And no state should be taken for granted. Hillary Clinton shouldn't take South Carolina for granted, and Bernie Sanders should not take New Hampshire for granted.
The advice I heard was always run like you're 3 points behind.
Yep. It seems like pretty solid advice right now. I'm surprised with so many of the precincts reporting. I mean, both of the groups are above 60% reporting, and yet we still don't have an answer on either end or a projection even from any of the news sources. The closest I can get here is Fox News, which now Fox News has also changed their headline photo to Marco Rubio. So it looks like that's going to be the narrative, Christy, going out of tonight. Really is.
Well, I think he's just put a target on his back for Donald Trump.
Yeah. 22% is where he's sitting right now, according to Real Clear Politics. So that's going to get interesting. I wonder. I mean, Rubio has not attacked Donald Trump directly this whole time, as far as I know. Nothing. Or at least if there is something, it's been very small. So this will be the first time when we see the two of them pitted against one another.
And it will be interesting to see how the other establishment candidates react to this. I mean, again, in some ways, Marco should do well because of his evangelical connections. I mean, he's a Catholic, but he also appeals to that Tea Party segment. I think he's a Catholic. I'm assuming that based on his ethnicity, which might be really horrible for me to do, but that might be wrong. Ted Cruz, after all, is evangelical. Yeah. And so, yeah, Cruz and Rubio doing well. Carson coming in fourth. I mean, think about that evangelical vote just going to Cruz, and you total up those numbers, or at least Carson's numbers to Cruz, and then it becomes a real solid victory for Cruz. So, yeah, the way that this is playing out with the various demographics is going to have really interesting implications. And with New Hampshire being a very different demographic, it will be interesting to see how the establishment now reacts in the 2 weeks leading up to the next, to the first primary.
I think you're right. I think another really interesting dynamic, of course, we talked about earlier about how Cruz had played the expectations game really poorly, that once he pulled ahead in Iowa, he pretty much allowed his campaign and the narrative to be, I'm going to win Iowa. And that sets the bar really high. Luckily for him, it looks like he's going to pull it out. But for Marco Rubio, who just stood in the back at his 10% and said nothing the entire time, he's blowing expectations out of the water. And so he played this really well, staying behind the lines, kind of misdirecting almost into New Hampshire, while spending lots and lots of time in Iowa.
And that 22% is pretty impressive.
It is.
Yeah, and I think there's a rule in politics that perception is reality, and this result, if it holds, very much shows that.
Mm-hmm. It does, and I mean, I guess the political reporters on the ground today, one of the things they always emphasized was that the Iowa caucus, the people who vote in the Iowa caucus, a big chunk of them stay undecided until caucus day. And they almost take pride in it. I think the number was 45% of people were persuadable going into the caucus today. And so I know that there's more persuasion going on the Democratic side than the Republican side, but there's still interaction over there. And it sounds like people who voted for Marco Rubio made that decision in the last week. And I bet, I don't know if I would subscribe to this opinion, but I would assume that the morning talk tomorrow will be about how the establishment woke up tonight and decided to go ahead. Those Republicans who maybe wanted to vote with their gut and go for Trump ended up going ahead and voting with their brain to vote for Rubio. Because let's face it, as Democrats, Rubio is the person who would be the most poised to defeat Hillary Clinton.
Sorry, there was a car in my background.
That's all right.
The other thing that I'll want to see, if I don't know if you have the numbers, but the percentages for Jeb Bush and the other establishment candidates. So was this about Trump versus Rubio? Or was this about establishment Republicans rallying around their version of Barack Obama and settling on him rather than the other establishment guys?
So on the establishment end on Iowa, you have Jeb Bush at 2.8%, Kasich at 1.8%, and Christie at 1.6%. So, I mean, I don't think that's too divergent from their original poll numbers. It looks like Rubio. Where did Rubio take his numbers from then? He took from Carson a bit, and he took from Trump. It appears, and that's where Rubio is getting his little bump here, just based on my own little just jumping and looking at the numbers.
Yeah, but is that based on the Real Clear Politics Iowa numbers that were most recently released? Because I'm wondering if people like going in and voting for Jeb when he's never going to do it, nobody likes him, I'm going to vote for Rubio instead.
I don't have the Real Clear Politics polling averages from earlier. The website's been updated for the ticker, but I imagine that Jeb Bush was at about 3% going into this. I don't recall him being too much lower or too much higher than that in Iowa, but I could be wrong.
But if you total up all those, that's the establishment, then basically the establishment vote went 89% for Marco Rubio.
Yeah, there's about 7% that's quote unquote establishment that's not Marco Rubio at this point, combined between Christie, Bush, and Kasich. One person who might be outperforming his poll numbers is Rand Paul, who polled 4.5% of the vote. So if 2012 is any example, he'll win all of the delegates from Iowa on the Republican side.
I think they try to prevent that from happening now.
Yeah. That'd probably be good. Still no update on the headlines. It looks like really this is going to be one of those things. Oh, here's breaking news. Martin O'Malley to suspend campaign after not registering in Iowa caucus results. So
wow.
Martin O'Malley's going to drop.
Well, I think that was Kevin's point made.
Yeah. And if the discussion earlier is any indication, then the people that were questioned about, or the question that was asked earlier, where will the O'Malley voters go? Because as we talked about earlier, in the Iowa caucuses, if a candidate doesn't get at least 15% on the Democratic side, then those voters either have to stay uncommitted or go somewhere else. They can't. So Martin O'Malley can't win 14% of any individual precinct, and so those people, those Martin O'Malley voters, had to choose between Clinton or Sanders, and it looks like they chose Clinton, just a little bit more than Bernie Sanders. Maybe it was 2-1 or less than that, but they turned it in that way, or either that or Martin O'Malley literally just no one showed up for him.
That might have been possible. I think the news story I saw before we went on air, there wasn't anyone who'd showed up from Martin O'Malley at a little gymnasium in some part of Iowa. So
yeah,
that might have happened a few
numbers,
places.
His numbers were literally always in the margin of error. I realize that the margin of error doesn't work that way, but nonetheless, I mean, we're talking about somebody who was polling so insignificantly that it could just be people saying over the phone, "Oh, I don't know that name. Great." Like, he sounds Irish. I'll vote for that guy.
It could possibly be that, yeah, for people who don't really take it seriously. But yeah, I mean, there's a possibility. Like you said, it was in with the margin of error, and the margin of error means if it's within the zero, means it could be zero in the real population, even though 4 people said it in the sample. Maybe in the real population who shows up, it's going to be closer to zero. And you spread that out over individual constituencies, and that means a few places where people just don't show up for him. So I think that's very, very likely.
I want to pose to you something that I think we're both going to agree on. And I want to also invite you to consider an alternative reality in which Donald Trump dominated Iowa tonight and basically went on to win the nomination. The question that was posed by Steve Schmidt that we talked about earlier about whether Donald Trump was the harbinger of the death of the party. Even with a Donald Trump nominee, the Republican Party dominates state houses, dominates state legislatures, dominates the governorships, has both houses of Congress and the national level. And so the idea that the party was just going to die because of this one national race just shows how well that big corporate interests have redirected progressives' attention to the federal level, when really local races and the state races are the places where progressives are being clobbered in and out every single cycle.
Yeah, I would have to completely agree with you. I think ALEC, which for people who don't know, I think it's the Association of Legislative and something else, but it's basically a right-wing think tank that has conferences where Republican legislators from state legislatures around the country go to these conferences, and they are handed out carbon copy bills to pass in their state legislatures. Like, they're literally handed the language of what should be passed, and that's why you see this rise across the country in legislation that's almost identical across the country, because it was all produced at these ALEC conferences, and the legislators then get wined and dined, and contribution pledges are made to their campaigns, which won't show up for a year later, so that the events aren't tied. And then they go home and they just send them over to the drafting people to say, write this for law in Wisconsin or in Kentucky or in Montana. And it's a huge problem.
There's a really big development on the Democratic side, and that is that pardon me, I drank my water too fast. With 77% of precincts reporting, the polling is now within 1 point. 49% for Sanders, 50.3% for Clinton. So a 1.3% lead for Secretary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. So that means that this could go on into the night. It reminds me a little bit of the 2012 cycle between the Rick Santorum and Mitt Romney, when they didn't know until 1 a.m. who had won.
I hope we don't have to stay up that long.
I don't think I can do it. I think my voice is starting to hurt and I'm getting sleepy, but it's exciting to see this for sure.
It's definitely the adrenaline that keeps you going at this point in the night, and then you just pay for it the next day. That's what I found.
Yeah. Well,
But
I was going to ask you, Christy, I was going to ask how you felt about going ahead and wrapping it up. I don't know if there was something really important you wanted to talk about, or if you wanted to really wait until the final results came in, but yeah, it's been a really good discussion so far. So whatever you feel like doing.
Yeah, I didn't really realize. I think we've been going for over 2 hours, which is insane. But yeah, I think we've had a really great conversation. It's 4 a.m. where we are, and it is a school night for us. So I know people in the States who are watching, and hello to the States if you are watching, or might be disappointed out because 60 of you are preferring to watch us than something else, or watching us alongside something else, like your Twitter feed or something else, which we're very honored to have you here. So before we do wrap it up, though, go to Will's channel and sub him. Do you want to give a little shout out and your name and everything, your content again?
Sure. So I've recently rebranded my channel, and I have given it the title Political Junkie News, because I'm a political junkie, and my channel is for people who just don't get enough from the normal news and don't get enough from maybe the history classroom. My videos focus on politics and history, and my new direction for the channel is I'm focusing less on giving my opinion on day-to-day happenings in politics and more on giving context to the news and diving deep into historical events. So love to have you, and I really did enjoy this conversation. Thanks to everybody who took time to watch us.
So I also wanted to say that one person successfully submitted a question, which was from The Motivator Opinion. If you're still watching, hey, thanks for the question. And it is there a chat function in here? Can't see it. Hello, by the way. That's an excellent question. I can't, I've seen other people, like when Kevin does his from the UK and people do theirs from the US, the chat function in the actual like YouTube channel seems to automatically pop up, and it doesn't seem to be doing that for mine. I don't know if that's because I'm in Germany or if there's just some other feature. I've turned on the Q&A as an attempt to try to redress this. I'm really just sorry for those of you who wanted to be in a chat room and kind of chat while we had our little chat. But if anyone has an idea about what might be stopping that, you can drop me a line. I appreciate it, because I'm allowed to turn the cat chant function on. And hello back. So that being said, I think we're going to wrap up. I'll probably go watch a little bit more on MSNBC. And for the viewers, thanks for watching for the length that you have. And if you enjoy this content, sub Will. Come back to my channel. Maybe we'll do this again for New Hampshire, which will be in the Eastern Standard Time, so it would be an hour less painful for us. All right, guys, so I'm going to stop the broadcast, Will, if you want to hang out. And to the rest of you, I've been Christy, Will's been awesome, and you have been awesome. Thanks for watching. Bye.